The first time it happened, I was 4 years old, kneeling on the floral rug in a rental cabin near Flagstaff. My parents were arguing quietly in the kitchen, the kind of low, surgical disagreement that felt more dangerous than shouting. I was concentrating fiercely on a small wooden train set when a noise, not a sound, but a definite noise, like the muted thunk of a refrigerator door closing miles away, occurred just behind my ears. I didn't stand up. I didn't blink. I simply detached. One moment I was a small boy with the heavy, warm weight of blood and bone, and the next, I was something else. I was standing precisely where I was kneeling. I saw my small, 4-year-old self frozen above the train tracks, tiny shoulders hunched in concentration. I looked down at my hands, not hands, but shimmering, heat haze approximations of hands. They were translucent, bathed in the faint, pale blue light of deep twilight. The immediate realization was that the world was wrong. The air was thick, like cold oil or highly pressurized water. The colors were slightly flatter, less vivid, as if filtered through a heavy glass lens. But the most terrifying change was the silence. It wasn't that I couldn't hear. I heard everything: the low rattle of the heating duct, the almost imperceptible whine of the old refrigerator, the deep, resonant vibrations of my father's frustrated sigh. But all sound was muted, flattened, divorced from its source. It was like listening to the world from 50 feet away while submerged 10 feet under tepid water. The acoustic deprivation was absolute. Sound traveled to my consciousness not through the ear, but through some direct, cold pressure on the spirit. I tried to speak. The effort was immense, and the resulting sound was nothing. I was a ghost watching my parents argue, watching my own small body breathe shallowly, waiting for the return. The return was abrupt and brutal. One moment I was hovering near the ceiling fan, observing the dust patterns on the blade tips, feeling the strange, magnetic pull toward my own head, and the next, the world slammed back into place. The colors burst forth, the air thinned out, and the noise, oh God, the noise, the sudden, visceral reality of volume hit me like a physical blow. The roar of the refrigerator, the sharp echo of my mother's voice, the heavy, smothering presence of gravity. I screamed. It was not a child's startled yelp. It was a deep, guttural, existential panic that lasted for an hour. My parents, frantic and terrified, called it night terrors. They called it anxiety. The pediatrician offered theories about underdeveloped sleep cycles and stress response. They never asked about the chilling, metallic scent that clung to the air immediately after the episodes, or the specific, clinical observation that I could relay details of their conversation they swore I couldn't have heard. The prescription was swift and simple: chemical fog. For years I drifted through my childhood wrapped in the soft, cottony prison of minor sedatives, medication designed to smooth the sharp edges of the world and, more importantly, suppress the spontaneous, terrifying departures. Every subsequent episode, from ages 5 to 12, felt like a punishment, a flash of cold, muffled exile. I became adept at recognizing the initial signs, the deep-seated hum that started behind the sternum, the sudden, paralyzing clarity of vision. When the hum began, I would clutch my mattress, bite down on my tongue, or sometimes just weep silently into my pillow, fighting the separation, fighting the strange, inevitable release from the heavy chain of flesh. The isolation was complete. I was never truly present. I was always anticipating the click, always checking the ambient sound levels, always half expecting the world to go muted and flat. My peers saw a quiet, withdrawn child who excelled disproportionately in subjects he paid no attention to. They didn't know I was practicing being a ghost. The true breakthrough came at age 12, when the drugs began to lose their hold and I decided to stop fighting. The sedation had taught me discipline, the fear had taught me focus. I realized that if I couldn't interact with the world while out, I could absorb it. I discovered the cheat code of my exile: subtitles. My parents had bought a massive, boxy cathode ray tube television for the living room. During my periods of AP, which could last anywhere from 40 minutes to 2 hours, the silent world was impenetrable, but the television screen offered perfect, passive knowledge. While my physical body lay dormant on the couch, my projected form would float a foot from the screen, consuming the endless stream of information printed cleanly beneath the moving mouths. I learned about history, astrophysics, engineering schematics, and most importantly, conspiracy theories. It was during one particularly long, muffled night, hovering in the static blue glow of the screen, that I watched Independence Day. The film was ridiculous, loud, and poorly written, but the concept lodged itself deep into the cold core of my being. The ultimate secret, the grand deception, the place where the government hid the absolute, irrefutable truth about existence, the extraterrestrial, the metaphysical, the unknown. Area 51. Groom Lake. The very names vibrated with the promise of answers. If I could leave my own body, defy the laws of material physics, and float through walls, surely something else existed outside the sterile, medicated reality my parents enforced. The problem wasn't my ability. The problem was the limited scope of my investigation. I became obsessed, but not in the standard, tinfoil hat way. My obsession was clinical, almost surgical. I knew the base's general layout, the flight paths, the perimeter security, the shift changes. I absorbed every documentary, every leaked document, and every breathless account available through the subtitle feed. The knowledge served as a lifeline, an antidote to the chilling emptiness of astral space. The gray, featureless void that surrounded my silver cord felt less frightening if I knew there was a solid, tangible goal at the end of it. Area 51 wasn't just a military base. It was the physical manifestation of the boundary between the known and the real. It was the only place that could possibly explain the cold, silent world I visited every night. It was the final destination on my spectral map. I was 12 years old, armed with years of passive knowledge and a terrifying, unacknowledged ability. I started waiting for the inevitable departures not with dread, but with grim determination. I was training for a mission that, at the time, seemed purely theoretical. I was a ghost practicing espionage, preparing for the day I would finally infiltrate the grandest secret on Earth. But even the most disciplined ghost needs a catalyst. And that came years later, delivered with the shocking, mundane finality of a heart attack. The end came not with silence or slow fading, but with a terrible, instantaneous snap. My father, who had spent his life meticulously maintaining the suburban fortress that housed our strange little family, was killed by a faulty junction box while trying to fix the sprinkler system. It was a biological shock, the kind of crude, undignified cessation that mocked my years of controlled, calculated detachment. I stood beside the gurney in the antiseptic chill of the emergency room, the air humming with the low thrum of monitors that were now useless. The initial grief was a flash fire, quickly quenched by a deeper, more chilling realization. I had been given a violent demonstration of mortality. Up until that point, AP had been a scientific curiosity, a solitary sanctuary, a tool for gathering knowledge. Now, it was directly confronted by the absolute finality of nothing. My biggest fear, the one that had always lain dormant beneath the surface of the silent, underwater world of my projections, was given a name and a physical manifestation. It wasn't the fear of death itself. Death was merely the absence of the body. My terror was the fear of being irrevocably severed and yet somehow conscious, of dying and finding myself permanently stuck in the static, silent, gray void that lay just beyond the reach of the silver cord, where the world dissolved into pure energy signatures and meaningless noise. I dreaded becoming an eternal, isolated ghost, a ripple of consciousness adrift without the possibility of interaction or the promise of transcendence. If the universe had built this mechanism of escape into my DNA, it must have an endpoint, a destination, a purpose. And if the destination was this terrifying, unending grayness, then I needed to find the source code, the operational manual, the truth behind the curtain. If the world's governments were hiding the biggest secrets of our physical reality, surely they were hiding the secrets of metaphysical reality too. My obsession with Area 51, born of childish fascination with B-movies, hardened into a driving, adult necessity. It wasn't about finding flying saucers anymore. It was about finding the administrative hub of existence. If there was a portal, a dimensional nexus, or even just knowledge of what happened when the cord finally broke, the government would have it locked away beneath Groom Lake. The mission became terrifyingly simple. I had to break into Area 51 and find the truth about the world beyond. I had to know if the Grey Void was the final stop, or if there was something else waiting. The subsequent months were spent in a phase of existence I now call the Forge. I reduced my life to a brutal, monastic routine focused entirely on transforming the accidental escape mechanism of my childhood into a precision instrument. My training was physical and mental, a combination of extreme endurance and absolute stillness. I meticulously tracked my circadian rhythms, learning to hit the exact moment of REM sleep, the sweet spot where the connection was easiest and the mind was sharpest, like hitting a target with a guided missile. I treated my body like a clockwork mechanism that needed perfect calibration. I adhered to a strict, flavorless diet meant only to fuel, not indulge. Sleep was precisely timed to 4.5 hours, interspersed with 3 hours of deep, waking meditation. I learned to ignore the body's demands, the cramps, the hunger, the gnawing loneliness, focusing only on the internal resonance, the specific frequency required to achieve controlled separation. The meditation was the hardest part. It wasn't about emptying the mind, it was about maximizing control. I would sit for hours, visualizing the silver cord not as a tether, but as a fiber optic cable, analyzing its elasticity, its bandwidth, and the specific tension it could withstand before snapping back into the body. I had to learn how to stretch it without breaking it, like a skilled climber trusting a rope over an abyss. I started small, projecting only across the room, focusing on clarity. I needed to see more than the blurry outlines of light and shadow. I needed the visual acuity of my physical eyes. Within a month, I could read the fine print on a book across the room, absorbing the information instantly. The next phase was range expansion. This was physically excruciating, even in the non-physical form. Stretching the cord 20 feet felt like cold pressure in my solar plexus. Stretching it across town felt like having my inner organs dragged by a powerful current. There was a point about 7 miles out where the resistance became almost insurmountable, a sharp, cold pain that threatened to yank me violently back. But through sheer, repetitive willpower, tenacity fueled by the terror of the Grey Void, I pushed past it. My new range expanded exponentially. From my neighborhood in Flagstaff, I pushed to the edge of the city, then across the desert expanses of Arizona. I could travel 20 miles, maintaining complete clarity, before the energetic pull became too dangerous. The projection had become something reliable, something that no longer felt like sinking underwater, but like gliding through a precisely lubricated medium. The muffled silence was replaced by a clean, clear, ambient white noise, like the subtle vibration of reality itself. I had honed my spirit into a sharp instrument of espionage. The time for preparation was over. The savings left by my father, meager as they were enough to finance the initial stages of the operation. I sold the suburban fortress and bought an old, nondescript gray-blue Ford pickup, a vehicle meant to blend seamlessly into the working landscape of the Southwest. I loaded the truck with only essentials, non-perishable food, survival gear, and the meticulously charted sleep logs that were now my most valuable weapon. The target was Rachel, Nevada. Rachel is the closest inhabited point to the front gate of Area 51, a desolate, sun-baked spot on the extraterrestrial highway. It is a town of fewer than 60 permanent residents, and one very famous, slightly depressing diner. The heat was immediate, dry and unforgiving, a physical contrast to the cold, wet sensation of the projection. The air here vibrated with the presence of secrets, not the high-frequency vibrations of AP, but the low, dense thrum of military power. I rented a small, dilapidated trailer on the outskirts of the settlement, far enough from the few streetlights that light pollution wouldn't interfere with my observation. The trailer was utilitarian, smelling faintly of old dust and dry rot, perfect for its temporary purpose. It was nothing more than a secure anchor point. I spent the first few days simply observing the perimeter from a distance in physical form, the warning signs, the patrols, the terrain. The vast, empty expanse of the desert floor, known as Groom Lake, stretched out before me like a dark, silent promise. The physical distance was daunting, but the 20-mile threshold I had achieved in Flagstaff was sufficient. The primary base entrance, where the camo dudes watched, was a mere 13 miles away. The moon was nearing its darkest phase. The time had come to initiate contact. That night, under the immense, star-choked canopy of the Nevada sky, I prepared for the first descent. I set the alarm for 3 a.m., the calculated nadir of my REM cycle. I lay down on the hard, narrow mattress, closed my eyes, and focused not on the silence, but on the tension of the cord, the knowledge that I was about to deploy my secret weapon against the most secret place on Earth, searching for the answers about life and the ultimate death. The drive from Rachel, Nevada, felt like a silent, desperate prayer. I rented a shabby motel room with cracked linoleum, paid cash, and bought blackout curtains that smelled faintly of mildew and spiritual fatigue. For 12 years I had prepared for this moment, imagining the blinding strobe lights, the hum of alien machinery, the clear, terrifying proof of other life. My first 3 nights were a study in anticlimax. At 2:30 a.m., I would perform the ritual, earplugs, eye mask, the precise breathing pattern honed through years of practice. The familiar cold, dull pop, and I was free. I would zoom the few miles across the dry lake bed, expecting chaos, expecting the secrets of the cosmos to be spilled across the Nevada desert. What I found was industrial efficiency. Area 51, the Forbidden Zone, the locus of every conspiracy theory since Roswell, was, on the surface, just a gigantic, heavily guarded R&D facility. The notorious hangars housed advanced stealth bombers and reconnaissance aircraft, nothing more exotic than highly secretive aeronautics. I ghosted through offices stacked high with blueprints, past engineers arguing about stress tolerances, and saw security personnel drinking lukewarm coffee while staring at monitors that displayed nothing more interesting than desert flora. The facility housed thousands of people, and their daily routine was stupefyingly boring. My fear of immediate alien encounter was replaced by the dread of bureaucratic paperwork. My obsession, it turned out, was built on the foundation of the mundane. My confidence wavered. Had I come all this way just to confirm that the truth was disappointment? On night 4, I decided the truth was simply deeper. I searched relentlessly, moving through the base's logistics infrastructure. I found the loading docks, specifically those designated for heavy, specialized cargo, the kind of cargo that shouldn't need to be moved in the middle of the desert. Following a massive automated forklift, I located an immense freight elevator shaft, large enough to swallow an entire tractor-trailer. The descent took time, plunging through the earth. Sublevel 1 was astonishing in scale, a true underground city. It was designed to support the thousands of personnel needed to run the base without ever needing to see the sun. Cafeterias, small medical facilities, gyms, even small sleeping pods. It was a self-contained world designed for maximum secrecy and comfort. Sublevel 2 was the logistical heart, tunnels of reinforced concrete, housing high-speed transport systems, a silent, rapid railway designed for moving technology, not people. The air here was noticeably colder, damp with the smell of circulated, filtered earth. I stayed close to the ceiling, skimming the cable conduits, feeling the ghost of the train's vibration as it rushed past. This level was about movement and transfer. Night 5 was where the air changed from merely cold to fundamentally wrong. I pushed down through a ventilation shaft to sublevel 3. The environment shifted instantly. The walls were no longer reinforced concrete or standard steel paneling. They were lined with a dark, dense, almost black metal that absorbed light and sound. There were no visible surveillance cameras, only small, black, perfectly flush sensor arrays mounted every 15 feet. This level was not about logistics or support. It was about containment. As I moved deeper into T3, the horrifying truth about this new material manifested. I was no longer gliding freely. It was as if I was attempting to swim through thick, gelid water. The metal itself seemed to emanate a subtle, humming field, a counter-energy that resisted my astral form. My practiced fluidity vanished, replaced by a desperate, slow struggle. This metal wasn't just physical, it was metaphysically tailored. It was designed to repel energy, specifically the type of energy I currently was. This was the first time my AP form had encountered real resistance, and the terror was debilitating. I wasn't invisible. I was merely gaseous, and whatever this metal was shielding, it didn't like even a ghostly presence. I was navigating a narrow corridor, scraping along the right wall to conserve energy, when I committed the fatal error. My form drifted too close to one of the sensor arrays. There was a high-pitched, almost ultrasonic ping that resonated directly inside my non-existent ears. It felt like an ice pick hitting the center of my being. Immediately, 2 red indicator lights flashed on the sensor array, followed by a low, guttural alarm that vibrated through the metal floors. Panic seized me. I shot backward, trying to retreat, but the viscous resistance of the atmosphere made my movements sluggish. A second later, I heard the rush of boots and the clack of automatic weaponry. 2 hazmat-suited guards rounded the corner, their faces hidden behind thick visors. They didn't see me, but they didn't need to. They halted exactly where I had triggered the sensor. The first guard deployed a specialized scanning device, a flat, handheld screen that began emitting a soft green light. They swept the area I had just been standing in, the green light passing through the space I currently occupied. The feeling was indescribable. It was a cold, alien touch, a violation of my very essence. I had been detected. They were sweeping for an anomaly, a breach in the field, a foreign presence. I pressed myself against the roof of the tunnel, freezing, holding my energy form as tightly condensed as possible, praying that the skin was tuned only for physical matter or a different energy signature. The guards swept the floor, the walls, and finally, directly below me. The violation was palpable, but the scanner did not react further. After 5 agonizing minutes, satisfied that the breach was an anomaly or a system glitch, they disarmed the alarm and retreated, leaving me alone in the oppressive, buzzing darkness. I spent the next 2 hours in full retreat mode, my adrenaline spiking with the certainty that my preparation had been insufficient. They knew about the possibility of non-physical intrusion, and they had built countermeasures. Yet, the fear was overshadowed by one simple fact: if they went to this much trouble to seal Sublevel 3, what was so valuable, so dangerous, that it required a metaphysical deterrent? I continued inch by inch, until the corridor opened into a vast chamber. At the far end, dominating the space, was a door. It was massive, circular, and constructed of the same dark, resistant metal. It looked less like a blast door and more like the hatch to a sealed, underwater vault. It was flanked by specialized conduits and thick cables that pulsed with internal light. Etched plainly into the center of the vault door, next to a heavy, electronic lock mechanism, was the simple, terrifying designation: 0 to 1. Night 7. The culmination of months of obsessive preparation, distilled into the space of a few agonizing minutes. I positioned myself directly above the massive circular door marked 0-1, hovering where the air was coldest and the magnetic fields felt thickest, like oil. The routine was precise and sickeningly slow. 2 hazmat teams, not just military guards, approached. They wore specialized suits, darker, thicker than standard, clearly shielded against something biological or energetic. Their movements were ritualistic. They wheeled in a small, shielded cart that hummed with deep, regulated power. This wasn't an entry process, it was a maintenance ritual. The initial procedure involved the complete shutdown of local power grids. The standard lighting of Level 3 flickered, then died, plunging the metallic corridors into emergency red. Then, the hazmat crews began the battery replacement sequence. They weren't powering the door, they were maintaining the barrier. As the old energy cells were pulled, there was a momentary vacuum of power, an absolute silence that swallowed the ambient hum of the mountain. It was during this fraction of a second, before the new batteries could fully cycle up, that the invisible membrane protecting the door vanished. I felt the pressure drop instantly. The air here carried a distinct, sharp metallic tang that had been held back by the energy field. And then, the door slid open. My rational mind, the part of me that had spent decades absorbing knowledge through silent TV screens and calculating trajectory, shattered. Behind the monumental steel of Area 51, deep beneath the Nevada desert, I expected a pressure vessel, a hyper-sterilized containment cell, maybe even a flight hangar for captured technology. I found none of that. Instead, I saw a large room, a grand foyer, designed in the style of a 1920s Art Deco luxury hotel. It was breathtakingly wrong. The walls were lined with dark, heavily lacquered mahogany, water-damaged and peeling in places. The carpet, thick pile in deep crimson and tarnished gold, was faded and worn, but the pattern, geometric, elaborate, and utterly out of place, was undeniable. A broken crystal chandelier, draped in subterranean grime, hung suspended above a marble check-in desk, staffed by nothing. The air inside the room was thick, not with military sterilization, but with the decay of old things, mold, stagnant air, and underneath it all, the piercing, acrid scent of sulfur. It was the most beautiful, most horrifying deception I had ever witnessed. It was not a laboratory designed to hold evidence of the cosmos. It was a trap designed to appeal to something deep and archaic in the human psyche. It felt like a memory I hadn't lived, a dream half remembered. All caution evaporated. The sterile gray environment of the deep bunker had been repellent. This room was an invitation, a hypnotic lure. It demanded entry. I slipped past the working hazmat crew, who were still fiddling with the new power packs, oblivious to my incorporeal form. I crossed the threshold of the massive door frame and entered the lobby. The moment my astral form fully penetrated the Art Deco space, the metallic twang of static electricity violently filled the air. The new power packs had fully engaged. The hazmat team sealed the door behind me with hydraulic pressure. I was inside, and the invisible energy barrier, the very thing that had repelled me for days, snapped back into place like a mousetrap. Terror, cold and absolute, seized me. I was trapped between two realms, sealed inside a space protected by a field I could not penetrate, millions of cubic yards of rock above me, and my physical body miles away, tethered by a thread. I screamed, a silent, muffled sound of pure psychic agony. The hotel lobby, with its faded glamour, suddenly felt like the mouth of a coffin. I turned, floating desperately back toward the door, only to collide with the shimmering, humming energy membrane. It felt like hitting deep, frozen water, dense and paralyzing. The temperature in the lobby dropped further, the sulfur smell intensifying until it burned in my non-existent lungs. I heard nothing with my ears, but I registered a massive displacement of air from the deep recesses of the lobby, from where the mahogany hall led into darkness. It emerged from the gloom of the hotel corridor like a sliver of darkness pulled taut. It was tall, easily 7 or 8 feet, and terrifyingly thin. Its limbs were too long, jointed unnaturally at the elbow and knee, giving it a jerky, insectal gait. The skin was a deep, necrotic gray, drawn tightly over a framework that suggested bone more than muscle. It had no discernible eyes, only smooth, blank patches where the sockets should have been, reflecting the dim red emergency lights of the bunker outside the reinforced door. Its hands ended not in fingers, but in long, segmented claws, like those of a massive, predatory spider. It stopped about 10 feet from me, tilting its head, a smooth, elongated skull, as if processing the impossible presence of my astral form. Then the voice came. It was not spoken, it was projected directly into the center of my mind. It was perfectly clear, resonant, and ancient, carrying the chilling authority of millennia. Asterisk, I see you. I finally see you, child of the tether. Asterisk. The realization struck me like lightning. This was not an alien visitor that crashed. This was a prisoner, something the government had entombed, not captured. And it knew exactly what I was. Asterisk, you sought the truth of the world beyond, and now you have found the vessel of that truth. You will be the means of freedom. Asterisk. I tried to flee, tried to pull back with every fiber of my being, but the hypnotic fear rooted me in place. The energy field was a wall, the entity was the hunter. It raised one of its massive, segmented claws. The motion was slow, deliberate, a chilling display of predatory confidence. The space around the claw warped slightly, an indication of localized energy manipulation. No! I pleaded silently, projecting pure terror toward it. Yes. Now, the link, asterisk. The creature plunged the claw forward, piercing my non-physical form with shocking ease. There was no physical resistance, but the pain, oh God, the pain, was immediate, visceral, and worse than any physical trauma. It was a cold, searing agony that ran along the invisible path that connected my spiritual self back to the sleeping body in the Rachel Motel. I felt the connection, the silver cord, vibrating violently. It wasn't being cut, not entirely, but it was being assaulted, yanked, violated by an external, parasitic force. The cold pain flowed up the length of the cord, like ice injected directly into my essence, overwhelming my capacity to remain detached. The creature's voice, now screaming through my subconscious, was no longer merely informational. It was a command, a declaration of ownership. The anchor is set. You are mine. I felt a violent, wrenching spasm, a tearing sensation that snapped me free from the Art Deco room, but only after the last, horrific instruction had been delivered, embedding itself like a splinter of black glass in my soul. Now bring me to your home. I woke up not with a gasp, but with a horrifying, instantaneous vacuum. 1 second I was suspended in the blinding, electrified cold of the Groom Lake sublevel, the next I was slammed back into the cheap mattress in Rachel, Nevada. It was a physical return unlike any previous one. It felt like dropping from a height of 20 stories, a concussive shock that rattled my teeth and left a metallic, coppery taste in my mouth. I didn't stay to process the terror. I didn't look in the mirror. I grabbed the truck keys, threw my duffel bag into the slate blue pickup, and tore out of the parking lot, hitting the highway before the sun had even begun to hint at the horizon. The headlights cut blinding cones through the darkness, aimed west, then north, away from the dry heat and the sealed silence of Area 51. I drove until the mountains gave way to scrubland, then until the scrubland gave way to the monotonous green of Oregon. I drove until my vision blurred and the coffee stopped helping. During that frantic flight, I tried to reclaim it. I tried the old methods, the focused breathing, the silent chanting, the precise mental visualization of the silver cord unwinding from the navel. I lay down on the dirty bench seat of the truck, concentrating until my head pounded with the effort. Nothing. The profound, heavy silence was the first sign. The world was suddenly and crushingly loud, immediate, and flat. The muffled, underwater quality that always signaled the approach of the vibrational state was gone. There was no internal hum, no buzzing in the ears, no distant sound of rushing wind that heralded separation. The spiritual door, which had been forced open by terror at age 4, had been slammed shut by a force far older and stronger than panic. The cord, that shimmering, unbreakable connection that defined my existence, was severed, or perhaps, retracted entirely. I was simply a man, confined to a single, inadequate shell of bone and flesh. The ultimate loneliness was not being separated from the world. The ultimate loneliness was being permanently locked in the world, stripped of the one tool that made the isolation bearable. But the silence was a lie. The real revelation came 3 days later, parked beside a logging road outside Sisters, Oregon, the truck idling just enough to run the heater against the high-altitude chill. I was numb, convinced I was safe, having lost the ability and thus the threat. I watched a local news report on my phone, a feed pulled up out of sheer, vacant habit. The anchor was talking about a sudden cluster of unexplained deaths in the small town of Redmond, 30 miles back the way I had come. 4 victims over 2 nights. All described as healthy individuals who died suddenly from massive, spontaneous cerebral hemorrhages or aneurysms. No foul play, no toxins found. Just bodies violently shut down from within. I looked at the map, then back at the phone. I remembered sleeping soundly, for the first time in a week, in a rest stop outside Redmond 2 nights prior. The entity hadn't needed my ability. It hadn't wanted my tool. It wanted my anchor. The cold truth settled over me like a sheet of ice. The thing from the Art Deco room was not a prisoner seeking escape, but a hunter seeking transportation. It had occupied me. It had used the raw energy of the trauma, the instantaneous severing of the cord, to bridge the gap and infest the host's body. I was the point of origin now. I was the nexus. The perpetual vector. It didn't need me to astral project, it was doing the projection itself, using my sleeping body as the temporary, protected base station. It was feeding off the souls of the living, taking the quick, violent energy of a sudden collapse rather than the long, slow drain of a natural death. The entity had turned my physical self into a mobile biological weapon, a silent, constantly relocating epicenter of death. I didn't hear its voice in my head anymore, thank God, but I felt the echo of its presence. It was a cold, ancient hunger that wasn't mine, residing just behind my sternum. When I felt a sudden, deep internal chill, even in the heat of the day, I knew it was preparing to move. When I awoke from a night's sleep feeling utterly drained, as if my own soul had been siphoned off just to power the host platform, I knew it had eaten. My life became a frantic, desperate calculus. I had to move every night. I couldn't stay in hotels, apartments, or even the same town for more than 12 hours, because the radius of its predation seemed to expand if the anchor point remained stable. I drive the dirty, blue-gray truck now. It is my tomb and my sanctuary. I sleep in industrial parks, remote truck stops, or abandoned gravel pits, always in motion, always on the fringe of society, never daring to form a connection with anyone, never allowing myself to feel safe. The ultimate, terrifying realization is why I cannot end this. Suicide, which seems like the only rational escape from this living nightmare, is impossible. If I die, the body ceases to be an effective anchor, and the entity, now completely unshackled from the constraints of physics and human necessity, would be fully and forever free on this plane. I am forced into perpetual motion, my miserable existence the only thing preventing a plague of spiritual consumption from sweeping across the quiet towns and unsuspecting cities of this country. I am a containment unit, doomed to drive until the gas runs out or my own heart finally, mercifully, gives way. So I keep driving. The highway is endless, the destination meaningless. If you ever see a beat-up, slate-blue pickup truck pulled over on the side of a deserted interstate, keep driving. Don't look at the driver. Don't stop to offer help. Don't even slow down. Because if you get too close, and if I happen to be asleep, the hunger residing inside me might just decide that you, too, look like a convenient source of energy. And I promise you, the death it brings is nothing like sleep.